Hello again. Good morning. We are going to be going to Beijing in a moment when we do get pictures from U.S. President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping at the Zhongnanhai complex. That's where they are. Meantime, the American president is scheduled to have tea, and it's also going to be a working lunch with the Chinese president before he departs China. Today is the final day of Mr. Trump's three-day visit, and the day will begin with a handshake and a photo session. I do believe that one's already completed. This particular area, the Zhongnanhai complex, it is home to the Communist Party headquarters. The two leaders will then take part in a bilateral tea session. It's going to be a less formal setting, expected to wrap up ongoing discussions. If you recall, yesterday at the Great Hall of the People, it was full of pomp and grandeur. There was, of course, a guard march as well. Not quite the same today. The engagements will conclude later with a working lunch. Mr. Trump will then depart Beijing on Air Force One and return to Washington after that. As for Mr. Xi, he's expected to visit the U.S. later this year. The state banquet yesterday, President Trump invited Mr. Xi and his wife in September to the White House. Well, yesterday, the two leaders held closed-door meetings that lasted about 2 hours. And what did they talk about? They covered Taiwan. They covered trade. They covered other differences in U.S.-China relations. The Chinese state media said that Mr. Xi told Mr. Trump that if Taiwan wasn't handled correctly, the U.S. and China risk clashes and even conflicts, putting the entire relationship in great jeopardy. We're going to bring in Angela Mancini, who's partner and head of geopolitical risk, APEC, at Control Risks. Hi there, Angela. President Trump and Xi are spending a second day together in Beijing. Can you tell us what businesses are thinking as they see all these pictures, even from yesterday, these pictures that exude calm and control? Do these suggest a real de-risking moment or just a temporary pause in U.S.-China volatility?
Well, that's the exact question all our business leaders here are asking because, coming into this summit, if we were to have had this summit prior to the Iran conflict, everyone would be pretty much solely focused on trade and technology issues from the business community. But of course, with the Strait of Hormuz closed and of course, Asian economies being disproportionately impacted by that, the energy concerns, that's also a big concern. So it's definitely terrific that they're meeting. It's a good sign of stability. I think that the fragile truce that they've had for 6 months on trade is important. Certainly, it's great to see the optics, and President Trump coming with all the CEOs means he's ready for business and ready to play that deal maker in chief role that he likes so well. But what businesses are really looking at is, besides the optics, which again are good, what substantive deals can we see coming out of this summit? And certainly there have been some early signs of purchasing agreements on, and opening up export controls for beef on the U.S. side to go into China, and China committing to buy some more oil from the U.S. Obviously, the subject of selling Boeing airplanes came up, and some were agreed to. But I think what business leaders are looking for is certainly A, stability. So how stable is this relationship shoring up now? And B, what might we really see when it comes to trade war detente, and also tech and export controls? Those are areas that are thorny. They're not easy to address, and that's what we haven't seen much of yet in terms of progress.
So apart from all the discussions, should some possible real outcomes come about, are we then looking at real change for companies down the line? And also, Angela, after a summit like this, actually, how quickly can the business environment change on the ground?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. Certainly, if on the U.S. side, if President Trump were to make perhaps unpredictable changes or comments, again, primarily, let's say, to tariffs, as we've seen in the last year since April 2nd, Liberation Day, the change on the U.S. side from a tariff perspective could have quite quick consequences for good or for bad for businesses. The other issues, the tech and export controls issues, would take longer, I think, to potentially digest. The main issue, though, I think, the acute issue that a lot of businesses are looking at is what's going to happen with Iran. Because if we were able to see China take a larger role in helping to address the Iran conflict, namely getting the Strait of Hormuz open, if we were to see movement on that, which would not be something we don't expect would happen quickly, but if we did see that in the near term, that would be something that would assure markets quite readily and quickly, and we would see impacts in terms of strategic planning and markets. But so, again, from the China side, things don't tend to move all that quickly. We may see some disruptive comments coming out of the US side, but businesses are really looking for, again, how stable is this relationship, not just today, but the building blocks of what we might see going forward. And then what might that mean in terms of very practical things that businesses are looking at now for their own strategic planning: tariffs, tech exports, energy flows, and other flows from the Strait of Hormuz.
Okay. Angela, President Trump likes visible wins, and he's got today to wrap some deals up. I'm sure the teams are working really hard behind the scenes. What kind of deliverables are you particularly watching for? And what can he present as triumph when he lands back in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, so I think regardless of what the outcomes are, President Trump will definitely present the summit as a triumph. There's certainly a lot of great optics around it between the fanfare he got from the Chinese side and certainly the entourage, both from the cabinet member perspective and all the various CEOs that went with him perspective. So certainly a lot to trumpet when he gets back. Certainly, I think on the more relatively easier wins to look for, and we expect some more to come out potentially today, are those purchase agreements. So the Bs, as they say, beans, meaning soybeans, beef, which we've already heard about, Boeing's, which we've heard about. So, are we going to see additional purchase agreements agreed to from the Chinese side? I think that would be good. Certainly, there's some optimism in the business community around the Board of Trade and Board of Investment. There's no great hopes that would move the needle significantly in terms of U.S.-China trade or foreign investment. But certainly, it's a good forum. It's better than nothing. A good forum for the two countries to come and talk about, future economic ties and how trade might actually work. I think, though, the real issue, again, that businesses are looking for is, are we going to see something notable on any of those thorny issues? We are starting to see some discussion around AI. So that was a subject that we thought might come up, and apparently it has, in terms of whether China and the U.S. can work together around some loose ideas, at least in terms of AI regulation and use of AI and autonomous weapons or not, and some high-level agreements on regulation and use of that from a national security perspective. But businesses are really looking for some movement on some of the thorny issues. We may not see any of that movement. A good outcome, though, would be an agreement to meet again and maybe get some of those issues tabled for more specific resolution if they do meet again in September. And again, those things are, what kind of tech can U.S. companies sell into China? Are we going to have any rare earth export controls coming from China back to the U.S.? And what do we see more broadly in terms of technology supply chains also related to Taiwan?
Yeah, the September meeting fueling hope and optimism, and possibly 2 more touch points in 2026. Well, Mr. Xi as well has warned that mishandling Taiwan could lead to clashes and even conflicts. Angela, for companies operating in Asia, what does that signal, and how should they build it into their risk planning?
Yeah, I don't think any of the statements so far out of this summit have changed anything in terms of corporate risk planning. Certainly, the Taiwan situation is one that businesses have been looking at in terms of their broader risk portfolio for quite some time. So as expected, we were not expecting to see anything significantly change in that regard in this trip, and it doesn't appear that there is going to be any significant notable change to be had, at least so far. I think more broadly, the Taiwan situation is one of a number of geopolitical hotspots that corporates are starting to watch more carefully after the Iran conflict, and just making sure they're really across what their operational footprint is, what their transit routes are, how diversified are they in terms of their cargo, their goods, their energy flows. So it's just one of many risk spots that that companies are watching, but we don't see this summit changing anything significantly in terms of that, in terms of a risk element.
Okay, Angela Mancini, so good talking with you. Thank you so much. Partner and head of geopolitical risk APEC at Control Risks.